Merry Christmas. I love having the kids in here. I think I'm going to start keeping them in on Sundays. It's a little more lively. Some of you act like you're half dead on Sundays, so I'm gonna hijack the kids' church. I like the amen corner over here. I hope you're ready for Christmas, and I suspect that if you're here, if you're not ready, you at least said at some point today, well, I'm as ready as I'm going to get. So here I go. And I think you made the right choice to be here tonight, because tonight is just one of those nights where we come together as a faith family, and we get the chance just to hang together in an atmosphere of worship, of the fact that the God that we serve loved us so much. As Greg was having a hard time expressing because of his emotions, the reality, if you even think of your own life and the sins you've done, the fact that God loved us so much that he still came to earth to rescue us. And we're here to celebrate that tonight and to kind of kick off all of our Christmas celebrations as we go from here tonight into tomorrow. And so if you'll listen fast, I'll speak fast, and we'll get right down to the point of our candle lighting here in just a very few moments, okay? I want you to listen to some words from Matthew chapter 1, beginning at verse 18. And it says this, and I don't have the PowerPoint for you, so you can either have a Bible, just listen carefully, or look it up on your device. It says this is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother was pledged to be married to Joseph. I hope you're listening to this, because this is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. We know this story, so we're kind of expecting it, and we kind of have already smoothed over all the rough edges. I just need to tell you, pay attention. There's some rough edges here. His mother, Mary, was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, and I'll assume, anyway, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. Remember, that's actually quite a little bit of information there. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. In the midst of what a lot of people saw as an opportunity for great drama, what Joseph himself saw as major sidetrack to his plans. The person he loved so much he wasn't going to make a public spectacle of her, but he was going to divorce her quietly in order to fulfill the law. Let's go on. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord, could I just pause there for a moment? After he had considered this, this may not be very Christmassy, but it might be real practical. If we would only take the time to consider some things before we acted, we might act differently than if we ran to a quick conclusion. After he had considered this, taken some time to think about it, allowing God an opportunity to speak to him, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins, including you, Joseph. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. Now, I'm going to share just a few thoughts with you from this that I hope will help you tonight and tomorrow on Christmas Day, and really even all throughout the next year. Because I think there's some things that we need to realize about the birth of Jesus that we have a tendency to forget. I believe there's been a concerted effort because we all like things that are neatly packaged. Most of us do not like loose ends. Most of us do not like messes. Most of us do not like chaos. We do not like anything that doesn't have a nice ending. In fact, if people create a movie and they leave you hanging at the end, we consider that a bad movie. You just left us hanging. But I want to tell you, even though Jesus came and he certainly fulfilled what he came to do, his birth had some very unique factors to it that we need to understand and remember when we're thinking about Christmas time. We have done a pretty good job of sanitizing the salvation story in Christmas. Think about this. How many of you have ever heard of the song Away in a Manger? Do you love the song? It's a beautiful, I love the song, except for this. It doesn't tell the truth sometimes. I'm not trying to keep singing it, okay? But just remember, it says something about him not crying. No crying he made or whatever. Do you believe that for a minute? I've been over and over in hospitals where babies are born, and the first time I see them, they look beet red and they're screaming their head off. And they're in a very sanitized environment. Jesus was born in a barn. And I have a funny feeling, since they probably didn't have anything to help Mary numb her feelings in that setting, she probably was doing some screaming too. And you go, oh, Rod, you're messing the story up. No. Because guess what? Some of you have some screaming going on in your lives, and you might be going into Christmas tomorrow with a less than perfect slate. You may be going into Christmas tomorrow with some things that aren't perfect in your world. What I want to tell you is we serve a God who relates to that, who understands that, who came to a very imperfect world, to a very perfect setting. And I can promise you, he was crying and he was screaming out. He was God, but he was fully man as well. I don't think he had colic, but he had the baby cry going on, pretty sure. You know, it says in that song, all is calm, all is bright, all is calm. All is calm. See, here's what we do. We enter into Christmas. We sing these perfect Christmas songs. We visualize this beautiful setting in a barn with animals around. And yet we live in a world where we have sanitizer. I bet you half of you have sanitizer on your person with you right now. How many of you do have hand sanitizer with you? Can I see your hands? Okay. Some of you aren't going to admit it. I know there's more of you than that. But that's still quite a few. You have it with you. Anytime, every time, I'm kind of a wash my hands freak myself. And so here we are. We just have these images, these ideas of this perfect setting. And so we go into Christmas tomorrow thinking in terms of everything has to be perfect. The house has to look perfect. The decorations have to look perfect. The dinner has to be perfect. The table has to be set perfectly. Everybody has to act perfect. Why don't you look to the person next to you and say this: Christmas would be perfect. You can go ahead and say it. Say it to somebody hear you. Christmas would be perfect if you did it my way. Okay. See, we have this collision You have an idea of what a perfect Christmas is. Somebody else does. And we come together, and families come together, and we try to pretend like everything's okay. Our expectations collide with our reality. What do you do when that happens? What do you do when there's an empty seat at your Christmas table? What do you do whenever there's strained relationships in your family at Christmas time? What do you do when something has worked out very differently than you thought it would? See, that's kind of what we call the chaos of Christmas. And I'm going to tell you, you will do yourself a great big favor, and you'll do your family, and you'll do everybody around you if you'll go ahead and embrace the chaos. I don't know. It could be a health issue. It could be a relationship issue. It could be an emotional challenge. It could be whatever it is. But as long as the fact is, it's going to be what it is tomorrow. And if you resist it, you try to act like it's not there, it's not going to make it go away. It will be there. Embrace it. I didn't say create it. Some people like to create chaos. I didn't say go create it. I said embrace it. You know what Joseph did with the chaos centered around Mary and the storyline that went with that, with her being pregnant before they had ever come together as a couple in marriage? You know what he did with that? He took Mary home. And so he took all the stuff that went along with it. He took all the gossip home. He took all the naysayers, all the stuff that people might think and say. He took it all home with him. Because this is what God told him to do. You say, well, sometimes I feel like I'm the only person that doesn't have a perfect family. Jesus was born into one. He got started off on kind of a left foot, folks. I mean, Joseph had a girl he was engaged to who was pregnant, and he wasn't even the father. It's kind of ugly. The context of Christmas, let's talk about that for just a moment, and I promise you just a couple moments, even though, and for the first verses of chapter 1 in Matthew where we read, there's this thing called the lineage of Christ. And it talks about all the different people who came through. Let me just talk to you a little bit about some of the people who were in that list of people who Jesus came through that's who he descended through. There were murderers in there were fugitives, there were liars, there were backstabbers, there were sex offenders in there, and there was also a prostitute in there. That's just some of them, okay? That's where Jesus came from. That's his lineage. And some of you thought you had a pretty rotten family background. Let me just tell you, Jesus came into he had pretty sorted, there were people in his past that were pretty sorted. I just need to tell you that. Sometimes we try to clean Jesus up and try to make him something he's not. He is the God of this universe. He is the King of Kings and he is the Lord of Lords. But as a man coming into this world, he came into a place that was very broken. He came through people who were very broken. He came to a mother and to a stepfather who needed him to come to redeem them from their sins. See, you go all the way back to the story of Adam and Eve, and what Satan tried to do was to get Eve to believe something. He took what God said and turned it into something else. He took it out of context. And I'm going to tell you, if you take Jesus out of the context of how he came, if you take him out of that context, I'm going to tell you what will happen. You'll have something other than the real Jesus who came. And the enemy knows if he can divorce you from your destiny, if he can get you out of context. You look at your situation, you look at your circumstances, you look at your family, you look at your dynamics, you look at your events tomorrow and the year ahead, and you say, well, this is awful. It's terrible. But just remember, Jesus knows all about awful and terrible. He was born into kind of an awful situation, a terrible situation. And if that wasn't bad enough, guess what happened? Herod actually was very threatened by the fact that he was being born and being called a king. And so he set out to demolish him right after his birth. And he goes to Bethlehem, sends an entourage to Bethlehem to kill all boys 2 years and younger. And so obviously Jesus was spared of that, but the other boys weren't spared of that. The families weren't spared of that. You know, we look at our world today and we say, what's going on? It's a violent place. It's a terrible place. It is a violent place, and it is a terrible place. And things like ISIL and all the other threats around the world, and some of them have kind of come too close for comfort in too many places and too many times, and too many things even going on in our own culture. And we look at that and we're going, these are terrible times. Let me tell you this, Jesus came to the world in terrible times. And there was mass murder that took place in order to try to take him out at a young age. Think of the great turmoil in Bethlehem when all those baby boys were killed. Think about that. See, that's the context that Jesus came to. Something that I've noticed is when you see somebody who's highly committed to something, you have to understand the context of that. Oftentimes, they were deprived of something, and that all of a sudden, that you see them being greatly successful, and you say, well, they're just, it just happened to them. They just got lucky. No, generally, if you look at the context of their lives, you'll see what it was that kind of drove them into that direction. You'll understand why they get up a half hour earlier than everybody else. You understand why they may stay up a half hour later. You understand why they're driven in order to do certain things, because they have a commitment to something because of a context of something that happened in their life where they were either deprived or where they suffered or where they went through some pain, and they said, as far as I'm concerned, that will never happen to me again. So they make this great effort, this great commitment. You'll see people who celebrate. There might have been somebody sitting near you tonight who, whenever some of the songs are being sung, they might have seemed a little bit exuberant in their worship. They might have seemed a little caught up in it. They maybe even raised their hands, or maybe they danced a little bit, or maybe they did something else. Here's what I want to tell you. See, if you you say, well, I just, that's not me, or I'm not like that, or whatever, that's okay. You have to go to the context. We have people who have been forgiven much. When you've been forgiven much, whenever you've seen God work in your life in significant ways, sometimes you might have a different response to worship than someone else. You see someone have great compassion. Oftentimes, the people with the greatest compassion are the people who have experienced some of the greatest pain. See, I want you to turn to somebody near you, preferably not your husband or wife, okay? Because I do not want to start any fights tonight before Christmas morning, okay? So you may have to look in front of you or behind you or past them or something. But here's what I want you to say to somebody near you. You don't even know what it's like to be me. Let me say it again. You don't even know what it's like to be me. Say it to somebody right now. See, listen, guys. Jesus came and breathed our air. Jesus came and bore our sin in his own body. Jesus came and took your struggle and my struggle. Have you ever heard people say, well, if that was my kid, I'll tell you what Guess what? It's not your kid. Do you know the context of that story? I'm pretty sure there's been some people around here that maybe even have said something like this or someplace else. Well, if I were the pastor of that church, you're not the pastor. Just thought I'd tell you. But anyway, hey, you're welcome. Some days I'll just give it to you. Or go start yours and you figure out how to do it. That's okay. You hear people say, well, if I had their money, you don't. Or you wouldn't be saying it. Why do we do stuff like that? We don't know what other people are going through. We don't know the context. I want to tell you this. Jesus came into the context of our world, and he relates to us. He does know your context. He does know my context. And the context of his life was that he came as a person who came from a line that was pretty altered. It wasn't a perfect line. He came to parents who weren't perfect parents. He lived in a world that wasn't a perfect world. And he came to a time period where there was great chaos, political upheaval. And he understands you like nobody else. See, the hope of the world was born in a barn. The context of your faith is that your salvation came from a stable. Now, I'm going to wrap this up with the conclusion. I just want you to look to somebody near you and say, when you go into Christmas tomorrow, you don't have to say you can go into Christmas tomorrow, but I want to preface it with that. When you go into Christmas tomorrow, here's what I want you to say, somebody right now near you, keep it in context. Keep it in context. Keep it in context. Listen, your weird uncle shows up, just keep it in context, okay? Whatever it is, you just keep it in context. Joseph, listen to this carefully, please. This might be worth writing down, but it's a little bit long, so you may not be able to. Joseph came to a conclusion based on a context. I'm going to put her away quietly. He came to a conclusion based on a context. She's pregnant, and we've not been together. When the angel showed up, the angel didn't change the circumstance. They were still unmarried. She was still expecting a child. Here, the angel gave a context that led Joseph to a new conclusion. I'm going to just read that right through one more time for you. Joseph came to a conclusion based on a context. And when the angel showed up, the angel didn't change the circumstances. The angel gave a context that led Joseph to a new conclusion. Do you believe the scripture that says that God works all things together for the good of those who love him or called according to his purpose? Do you believe that his thoughts are higher than our thoughts? His ways are above our ways? See, the conclusions that I come to in my mind are a result of the context I've created in my heart. I expect perfection, and what happens is when I create the context of perfection, I'm disappointed. When I create a context that's created by God's purpose, we really never have to be put to shame. When we create a context that is created by our pain, we often experience regret and sorrow. We need to frame pain in God's purpose. All things work together for good. Doesn't say God causes all things. Doesn't mean that he brings everything on. We live in a world where there's free will. We live in a world where evil does exist. And not everything that is done is honoring to God. Otherwise, Jesus would not have said, pray that his will would be done in heaven or on earth as it is in heaven. And so we know there are many things that are in contrast to God's will. But I want to tell you, God in his providence is able to redemptively bring about good from that which was meant for evil. Frame your pain in God's purpose. I'm going to tell you, if there's no other message that Christmas brings us, it's this: you're not alone. Here's the message of Christmas: you're not alone. Remember, Jesus came, he's the Savior of the world, but he said he came as Emmanuel, God with us. God is with us because Jesus came. The veil was broken in two. He entered in. Joseph, your dilemma is going to be your deliverance. This is said to Joseph. Joseph, your dilemma, your problem, your dilemma is going to be your deliverance. This little baby that's being formed, boy, that's created you a problem. That's a headache and a half. But guess what? He will deliver you, Joseph. Let me just say to you and to me, why don't you choose to take Mary home with you tonight? Why don't you go ahead and take Mary home? You know what Mary represents, don't you? Most of the stuff in your life that isn't fixed right now. Most of the stuff in your life that isn't right now. Most of the people in your life who are annoying you. Most of the people in your life who are getting it wrong, at least according to your opinion. Seemed like Mary had made a bad mistake. It seemed like things had gone terribly wrong. The angel said, what looks so wrong is unbelievably right. Take Mary home. He took her home. We've got to take the problems that are part of our life and we have to take them home with us. Ignoring them, pretending they're not there, denying them, will not make them go away. Embracing them, the person and the power of Jesus Christ, will help us to go forward with faith. I'd like to ask you to jump to a new conclusion tonight, and that is that God is very aware of your circumstances and your experiences, and he's with you in the midst of them. And you know, I can picture Joseph. Here he is. He's got this child. He says, I'll take responsibility for it. But it's not my child, but I guess I'll still take responsibility. Waking up, looking over at Mary and saying, I mean, did an angel really show up? I mean, is that really what happened, Mary? I need you to tell me the story one more time. I know I saw an angel too, but I just need to know you saw that angel. I know. See, sometimes what we have in mind isn't what God has in store. You're about to divorce your destiny because of a disappointment. See, Joseph, good man, he was going to do the right thing. He's just going to divorce his future because it was the right thing to do. But what he was going to do was divorce his destiny because of this seemingly unfortunate circumstances. Have you been pushing away the very thing that God brought into your life to produce your purpose at a new level? See, the way you deal with disappointments in your life determines how you experience your destiny. The greatest pain in your life may release the greatest glory in your life. I want to conclude this with telling you this. The very thing that feels the darkest and the hardest and the most difficult for you to bear is the very thing that Jesus came to put his light. He came as the light of the world. He came to put light there. He came to show you how to cope with it, show you how to deal with it, show you the pathway forward, even if it's only one step at a time. That's what Jesus came to do. When we celebrate him being the light, he's the one who isn't afraid to walk into the darkest place of your life. He's not afraid to walk into the place that you feel most resistant to anybody coming to and shining the light of his presence and saying, look, let's do this together. Let's face tomorrow together. Let's face this circumstance together. Let's handle what's in front of us together. Let's do it together. Jesus invites you to invite him into those places. God is with you. God is for you. God is in you. Keep Christmas in context. Keep your problems in context. Keep your blessings in context.